Moment.
Okay, it is recording. Good news.
Perfect.
Okay, and I take it that everybody consents to being recorded. All right, welcome everybody. We're very glad to present this workshop, a very exciting workshop with our ARA postdoc, Dr. Claire French, and her collaborator here at WITS, Sibusiso Mkhize, a graduate student in Department of Theatre and Performance. And this is a particularly exciting workshop because Claire's residency, which we always envisaged as a physical residency, with you being present on WITS campus, is of course being made impossible by the COVID and the way things are going. Who knows if we're ever going to have you physically present here at WITS. But what Claire has very resourcefully done together with Sibusiso here at WITS is to work remotely and to develop a process for conducting her research as an ARA fellow via, as she puts it in the title of this workshop, via voicemail. And it's a 9-hour time difference between where you are in Australia and where Sibusiso and the rest of the TAP students are here in South Africa. So they're going to be telling you all about the process. Just some background on it is Claire, as I've said, is our Arts Research Africa 2021 postdoc fellow. She's also an associate fellow at the Institute of Advanced Study at the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom. And her performance practice and research focus on approaches to making multilingual performance mindful of reproducing linguistic hegemonies in collaborative, applied, and autobiographical contexts. Claire has lived and worked as a theatre and performance dramaturg, producer and facilitator in Australia, Germany, the United Kingdom, and South Africa. And her collaborator here at WITS, Sibusiso Mkhize, is a theatre practitioner, performer, musical director, musician, actor mentor, and has a WITS BA Honours in Dramatic Arts. And his performance practice explores African musical theatre, Black aesthetics, and autobiography. He's currently busy with a Master of Arts here at WITS in TAP. And Claire's mentor during her postdoc is Professor Samuel Ravenguy, who's also here and will, I'm sure, be contributing to the discussion. The way that we are structuring the workshop is roughly first 40 minutes will be Claire and Sibusiso doing their presentation, and we'll follow that with an open discussion. So please, if you have questions that occur to you while you following the initial presentation, please just drop them into chat and we will bring them into the discussion at the end. Otherwise, bring your questions into the open discussion period, which should be about 15 minutes worth. So further background just on the particular project is Claire and Sibusiso are exploring the opportunities for decolonizing performance-based pedagogies via digitally mediated interactions. And the worlds came into contact through the project Decolonizing Language Ideologies in the Body, a multilingual practice as research project, which Claire is pursuing here with her ARA postdoc fellowship. So let me hand over to Claire and Sibusiso to tell you the rest. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Claire and Sibusiso.
Thank you, Christo. We're going to start with just a little introduction and then we'll share some slides. I smile gleefully as I reach over and see that Sibusiso has left a voice message overnight. It's almost 8 minutes in length. This must be a thoughtful meditation. You must have a lot to tell me. My morning coffee is made to his elaborations on simultaneous embodiment, notions of decolonization, and decolonizing actor training.
I pause for the evening to think through Claire's article. I tell her that I find the idea of the body being disinhibited to be an interesting one that I would like to explore further. I note a few aspects of my article being tricky, to understand, and I will need clarification.
I delight at the prospect of the exchange. I highlight a 2-hour gap in the afternoon of my schedule with feedback to Sibu, which gets pushed around until 8 p.m. when I grasp an uncluttered mind. I start my voice message with, "Thank you for your messages this morning. I will begin with responding to your question about what the disinhibited body is and how I've experienced it being facilitated."
These are our pedagogies. Voice messages supported by video calls, emails, and text messages have emerged as a byproduct of going online during the third wave of the South African COVID-19 pandemic. As time has passed and methods for harnessing voice messages have been developed, we have come to realize that there are no on-site equivalent in rehearsal rooms or university studios. In this presentation, we will discuss voice messages as opportunities for reflexivity, horizontality, and decolonization within a facilitator training context.
And I'm just sharing my screen with you. Just nod if you can all see my slides, the first page. Great. So we have titled today's presentation with Decolonizing Facilitator Training, Voice Messages from the South African Day to the Australian Night. And this reflects our time differences, which is 6 hours. There's many different time zones in Australia, so it's kind of confusing. As well as our interest in informing decolonizing pedagogies. So we'll just start with a brief structure, and we'll offer some detail on the background of this research project to contextualize our collaboration, as well as provide the learning outcomes and a bit of the relevant theoretical definitions to support our forthcoming analysis. And we'll outline the conceptual and methodological frameworks that are relied on to design this research project, as well as draw meaning from the data presented. And then we'll move on to analyzing Sibusiso's responses within a video call format, and then discuss his responses within voice messages and draw some comparisons there. The penultimate analysis will draw connections from this data to decolonizing pedagogies. And finally, we'll ask some questions to stimulate discussion and explore the next steps. So Krista has provided some background on the project, so I'll keep this brief. But the aims of the project are essentially to develop methodologies for locating and challenging language ideologies. And this has very much come from, and it's advancing some of my doctoral research in South Africa, that basically saw that the improvising body that was collaborating and its potential to disinhibit the actor from language ideologies that previously prevented them from drawing more widely from their linguistic resources. So what I mean by that is often when performers are in a performance making space, which is aligned with theatre and other Eurocentric forms, they might not draw as widely from their linguistic resources as they might in an everyday sense or in a private domain like the home or with their friends. And when we're making autobiographical performance, it's particularly important. I mean, I think that this is fairly ideological, but I think it's fairly important all the time, that actors draw as naturally as possible from their linguistic resources, which I mean language practices as well as so-called languages. Varieties I would prefer to refer to, so that we're not seeing them as like fixed constructs. So that's basically where my research is coming from. And this entire year really looks at two different stages. One, which is training Sibusiso in some of these methodologies, which very much rely on a methodology called Viewpoints, which is a Mary Overley's philosophy, which we'll go into more in a minute. But then really working to deconstruct those and reconstruct those for Sibu's context. And that's the first stage which we'll focus on today. And then the next stage will be seeing him take those and start to work with an autobiographical performance project. I would be, if this goes ahead, otherwise we're going to continue in this training and then looking at different ways of doing the training. I would be then analyzing it from afar via film to see how those methods do and do not allow actors to draw more widely from their linguistic resources. So this first stage went from January to May of this year. And we'll now talk about the learning outcomes.
Mm-hmm. So there are two learning outcomes that Claire has aimed towards for this first stage of the project. And the first one was to basically equip me with the theoretical and practical principles of Mary Overley's Viewpoints, actor training philosophy. And the second one was to basically create links, between how I can augment this philosophy for my practice and context in order to challenge language ideologies that allow for new potential multilingual performance possibilities. Okay, so now we will get into talking about what Viewpoint actually is. So Viewpoints is a philosophy created by American postmodernist choreographer and dancer, Mary Overley. It includes 6 concepts or elements, namely space, shape, time, emotion, movement, and story. Together, these are materials to be able to call on as a director or facilitator when enhancing the palette of the actor's performance, their collaborative possibilities, and explorations of resources that they might not know yet. So for Claire's research, they basically provide a way for actors to begin thinking in the body so that their communication focuses, on their peer actor and the improvisation with them. As a result, they stop thinking about the big picture, the people sitting watching them or the audiences beyond that. And they focus on speaking, being understood mostly by their peer. The actor is disinhibited to draw from various language practices that they might not know, they might not use in the theater and performance setting.
Wonderful. So now that there's some understanding of the project and the methodologies at the heart of it, we'll articulate the research design. So the concepts that we bring together for this presentation rely on the notion of what it means to decolonize. Massive concept, as we all know, right? So we define this as at least 2 overlapping processes, beginning with locating and challenging colonial systems and beliefs at institutional and embodied levels. And we consider the damage of the colonial consciousness at socio-cultural and linguistic levels that Ngugi wa Thiong'o suggests as inculcated in African mind. And this process calls into account the body and embodiment with decolonization, also drawing on Benjamin's spats. So once beliefs are challenged, the body becomes more open to providing space for additional beliefs to enter and exist alongside one another, mobilizing the second process within how we see it means to decolonize. And Thokozani Matigula emphasizes the necessity of this second process in her definition of decolonization within a South African higher education context, suggesting it's reciprocally linked with, begin quote, endogeneity, knowledge of Africans, generated by Africans and for Africans in higher education institutions, end of quote. This second process emphasizes a learner's beliefs to enter all stages of the training process and shape its future structures. And our definition also echoes Samuel Ravenguy's view of decolonizing African theater that begins with an indigenous text becoming, beginning of quote, a generative matrix into which other texts can be keyed. End of quote. So to decolonize is not just an embodiment of the researcher's foci, the larger research project over the year, but a response to the new potential colonizing possibilities of the collaboration between Sibusiso and me. So to add on to that idea of decolonizing, we pair it with pedagogies to refer to the continually negotiated teaching and learning methods for sharing, challenging, and legitimizing beliefs. And in this flowchart, we show the link that's made in order for beliefs to have opportunities to be continually negotiated, which is needed for decolonizing pedagogies. And these pedagogies need to be both reflexive and horizontal. And reflexivity in this case is defined as actions taken by the facilitator or the learner in continually locating and responding to differences in epistemologies and methodologies. And horizontality, which is a term from Viewpoints that we borrowed for this, refers to a horizontal or lack of hierarchy in the teacher and learner dynamic, understanding that it's based on the notion of teaching and learning. It's very difficult to remove it entirely, but we will continually try and search and test. So to move on to the methodological framework, elements of this research bring together a practice as research approach, as we've mentioned, with an interdisciplinary sociolinguistic and performance studies approach, which I've advanced in my doctoral research and in my future monograph. And this allows for us to analyze close details to make, within linguistic structures and embodied ones, to make meaning in the socio-historical context. And you'll see a bit more of those approaches as we come to analyze the material. So as for the selection and organization of the data analyzed today began by laying out all of our interactions over the past, or over 4 months, the 4-month period, January to May. And these took place via interactional platforms, including WhatsApp, text and voice messages, video calls via Teams and Zoom, and emails via Outlook and Gmail. And we transcribed these where necessary. So from this point, once we had this interactional sequence, we coded interactional platforms which we used the most and for what purposes. And text messages came as being the most used platform by far, but these are mostly used for organizational and administrative tasks. So in line with our particular learning outcomes, we went for the second option, which was voice messages, which were used secondary to text messages, but still quite a lot between the two of us. And these were used for mostly professional and creative tasks, which fit our learning outcomes.
Cool. I will now introduce the first example of pedagogies in this training program, which involved me interacting with Australian Viewpoints specialist and facilitator, Ruby Donahoe, in a video call alongside Claire. We will focus on how I responded to Ruby's comments within the second workshop, which was held on the 3rd of May. This was when she had asked me about how I facilitate emotion as a director, and we will provide some context for you.
So this is the transcription of a 2-minute interaction between Ruby and Sibusiso, after she asked him several questions that rephrase how he facilitates emotion. It follows Ruby speaking for 15 minutes about emotion, providing examples with how she helps actors access emotion in ensemble building activities.
Mm-hmm. So this part transcribed is the end of my response to Ruby, where I say the following, which I will read for you.
Emotion for me is a dangerous thing, because then for me personally, I think it moves you away from authenticity.
Claire, if you don't mind, can you please take that again?
no problem. Who have we got? That's
Replicate emotion for me is a dangerous thing because then, for me personally, I think it moves you away from the authenticity of the work because now you're focusing on
replicating an emotion as opposed to living in the moment and doing what you have to do. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
You know, this is just my own kind of personal politics when it comes to emotion, because I've undergone a lot of processes where I've been taught how to emote the scene with sadness, and I felt that it doesn't work. And I think that's also, you know, I'm looking at things from a very Afrocentric kind of, you know, perspective where, you know, things live in the moment. You know, if you look at ancient storytelling, very ancient storytelling is all about things that live in the moment. You know, you're telling a story under a tree today, tomorrow it's in a circular space somewhere else, you know. So each performance has a life of its own. But if you are honest to the integrity of the work, you know, I personally don't think that we need to focus so much on emotion, because all these other elements, when used correctly, are able to act as a vehicle for emotion, especially intention for me.
Okay, so I selected this part of the transcription because of Sibusiso's rapid pace. Have we got someone that needs to get kicked out? Should we? Or are we okay over there, Christo? It's a little disruption.
All good.
Hello. Oh. Okay, fab. Maybe we could mute. Oh,
wir sind hier mit ein paar Freunden. Warte.
Okay. So I selected this part of the transcription because of Sibusiso's rapid pace and how emotionally charged some of his emphasis was in terms of how, where and how concrete he sounded about the beliefs that he was sharing. I see that for Christo, I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted. Can we
Yes, Claire?
Can we possibly mute these guys?
Is this some other feed coming in? It's not yours.
It's not my feed. There's basically...
But also what's interesting, sorry to jump in, is that the person's name is Sibu.
Yeah, they've like...
Hello, my guys. I'm from Germany.
Okay, great.
Got rid of them.
That's some entertainment, but it's great for them to be muted at least. Okay, back into the transcription, hey? I selected this transcription because of his rapid pace, as I mentioned, and how emotionally charged some of his emphasis of terms were, and how concrete he sounded about the beliefs that he was sharing with Ruby. And you see there's some opportunity for reading rapidity and emphasis in the transcription.
Hello guys, I'm putting my Instagram. My Instagram is Paris.540. And we tried to kick them out.
I think, yeah. Okay, great. So we're Zoom hackers for the day. There's some opportunity for reading the rapidity and emphasis in the transcription with the dot, which is in the parenthesis, as you can see in line 2, which means it's less than a second pause, and then the 0.2 and 0.5 show the number of seconds that are paused for in this transcription. I'm just looking for those. Oh, there's one in line 7. His rapid delivery is evidenced through his tendency to take very few pauses, more than 0.1 seconds in length, except for before he asked Ruby a question at line 5. as you'll see. Am I making sense? Oh, it's actually line 6. There are a number of qualities which suggest this interaction is clear and concrete, such as when he asked Ruby the question, am I making sense, in line 6? And there is no upwards inflection at the end of this question, which would usually be marked by an arrow point pointing up within this transcription approach. The lack of intonations signals a disinterest in the question, having a question function that mobilizes an answer for his interlocutor, Ruby. So additionally, he overlaps her response in line 8, signaling either a disinterest in hearing from her at that moment, or that he hoped to complete his thought. And so the will towards the completion of a thought or idea is very much central to these features. And those include how he prolongs the first syllable per of personal, which is in line 8, the end of line 8. Doing the same with the in very in line 13, and later int, egg, and egg of integrity in line 20, and rect of correctly, which he read in line 23. And so all of these lexical items are marked by emotional emphasis, particularly in this context when an artist is speaking about their choices in an artistic practice. And prolonging an initial syllable increases the time spent on it, and thus draws attention to the emotional emphasis of these terms. So there are many other analytical components signaling Sibusiso as looking to complete the interaction with Ruby that we write about in the article. But for now, we'll move on to what it might mean in terms of pedagogies.
So, I mean, definitely you're right, Claire. You know, I think at this moment, I was trying to get across to Ruby, you know, the importance of intention and how actors can use that, you know, to access emotion. So while Claire read me as concrete and looking towards an end, you know, I was also in a way grappling with, you know, being able to clearly articulate my thoughts in English, you know, being aware, you know, with awareness that I might not be received in the way that I hope to be, which then, you know, kind of ushers us back to the multilingual interests of the project and how these might be embedded in the training stages too. So in terms of the learning outcomes, though, this example is some evidence of how, you know, this direct questioning from Ruby wasn't allowing me to further understand or take on the philosophies of viewpoints into my understanding, my own understanding of emotion. I was simply articulating what I believed.
So now we turn to voice messages, and this features our use of voice messages in WhatsApp and how Sibusiso came to co-create approaches to thinking through theory via such voice messages. So in the first meeting, I asked Sibusiso what platforms he might like to communicate via, mentioning voice messages within the options because I've used them in long distance friendships and they seem to work over time zones. And he agreed to the use of voice messages and email for more formal purposes. And at the beginning of April, I recorded the first voice message that was shared with Sibusiso. And I basically worked through some thoughts on a reading that he had dedicated to me, Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Moving the Center. And I approached it without too much thinking, working through each of the chapters in a fairly messy and conversational way. And at the end of the recording, I'm like, because it just automatically sends as soon as you press stop, I felt somewhat vulnerable because after all, I was supposed to be teaching him, right? And shouldn't I have a more formal or knowing approach? But I trusted my gut and allowed myself to be out there in all the mess that it was. But he did respond on the same day via text messages, and the rapidity of his response confirmed his listening and some interest in what I had to say, and that helped with the vulnerability.
So about a month later, I then recorded 5 voice messages for Claire that each responded to the initial chapters of Overly Standing in Space that Claire had set for me. These differed in length from 44 seconds to a couple of minutes and sounded the process of thinking through these theories. So now we will focus on the recording that covers emotion. This is the transcription of my voice message covering emotion, which I will now read for you.
Emotion. Interesting how it is kind of paralleled with the notion of stage presence. Really interesting. I'm trying to get my head around that.
You know, but also, you know, it's being present, you know, the here and now, you know. I think, I mean, the one thing that I only see is how do you teach emotion? You can't teach emotion, you know, but there are techniques, there are skills, you know, as to how to emote. Can't teach students how to emote. Can't teach a performer how to emote, you know, being influenced by so many other things. But I mean, I think it's interesting how here it's been paralleled with the notion of presence, you know, being here, being now, you know, that relationship that you have with the audience as well. You know, the notion of eye contact and all of that, and how it plays a part in and on the emotion of the actor on stage, you know. I don't know if this is Grotowski, but there's a saying that says, as a director, if you as an actor cannot strip, you know, naked for me, it's also difficult for me to strip naked for you. And it also says in the reading that as actors, you know, that we should stop trying to run away from who we are, because I think that's where the blockages come in when it comes to emotion, right? But the more you listen to yourself, the more you open yourself, the more vulnerable you are. And I think, you know, the more open you are to expressing and to receiving as well, because I think emotion is also that it's not just an expression, but it's also what you receive from the outside, from the audience, from, you know, whoever you are acting with. So I think what is interesting for me is how it was paralleled with stage presence, really.
So we selected this part for the transcription because of the slow pace, a consistent rhythm, and a hopeful and jovial tone. And while these tend to be common to Sibusiso's approach to the other 4 voice messages, it starkly compares to his interaction with Ruby via the video call about emotion. So this is why we chose it. And he uses audible in-breaths marked as the triple H and a dot down here on line 23. As pauses at increments throughout. He's also used them on line 2, line 16, and and I've mentioned line 23, which signals some comfortability in first taking big breaths, as well as allowing his breathing to be heard by me. And such breathiness is a feature of all of the recordings, particularly those that have been coded with him showing a good grasp on the subject. And thus, in this instance for Sibusiso, audible breaths as pauses between thoughts are viewed as a marker of a confident meditation on a subject. And additionally, there are repetitions of words immediately after one another, such as to emote at line 9, or of the actor, line 18, and run away from who we are on line 24 and 25. And such repetitions similarly signal Sibusiso thinking through his ideas and responses as he says them, using the voice message layout as a sounding board for his thoughts. And repetitions of words might otherwise be read as a marker of nervousness, or if a rapidity were also present in the interaction. But Sibusiso clearly spends a full amount of time on each of the word, as if it were functioning similarly to his audible in-breath, again signaling a meditative approach to his voice messages. So overall, he seems to be thinking through this material with ease and without thinking about the delivery too formally, as I had done in my voice message.
I mean, yes, definitely. I was very much interested in reflectively working through some examples of my practice and relevant theory to find my own way into the material. It was generally quite relaxing for me.
And you carve out new formulations that deviate from my recording by structuring each recording with an idea based on Overley's chapter. And this showed initiative and creativity and interest in engaging with these co-constructed and hierarchically horizontal pedagogies. And in thinking about the learning outcomes, you were bringing in new beliefs alongside your own, dialoguing with some of the viewpoint philosophies about emotion. So in thinking about that idea of reflexivity, from a teaching perspective, Sibusiso's voice messages saw me preparing myself for his monologuing. For this, I needed a quiet and uninterrupted amount of time for the said time that was on the voice messages, because it says how much each of them go for. And as a result of building an environment around his messages, I began to more fully place myself in his context. And he had an unlimited time to think through the material as a learner and link elements of his own context into the process of making meaning. And this time was and is unique for pedagogies because he could develop the material in his own language, albeit constricted by English in this case, which we look to perhaps change if we continue this training process. So thus reflexivity was central to both of our experiences as we navigated the space and time between our positionalities and the epistemological framing of these.
And with these voice messages, you know, I believe they were very much horizontal in their approach because of how we could co-construct pedagogies. You know, I could formulate my own questions, answer them in my own way, and use them to, you know, guide my practice. But also just to add, you know, I think horizontality is very much, you know, at the heart of the work that I do. You know, because I think it also invites notions such as a kind of collaborative, you know, effort, you know, within my practice as a facilitator, you know, as an actor, as a performer, or as a teacher, you know.
Yeah, Sibusiso seems to have. Yeah, oh, there. Yeah.
I'm wondering if it was me. Sibusiso, we're not hearing you. Okay, great, you're back. Sorry, continue with that thought.
Did you guys lose me?
We did lose you, yeah.
Can you guys? Hello?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, so what's the last thing that you heard me say?
You were talking about your practice and how important that horizontality is to it.
Oh, definitely. So, I mean, I was saying that horizontality is very much at the heart of what I do and my practice, you know, as a facilitator, as a performer, as an actor, you know, as a teacher, you know, horizontality is very much, you know, at the heart of what I do, and mainly because it allows for a collaborative kind of process and interaction, you know, with the art, you know, in the way in which we breathe into the work. And I mean, if you look at, you know, the interactions that I had with Claire via voice messages, you know, particularly responses to material like this, you know, they reveal a lack of hierarchies and an opportunity for mutual negotiation. And, you know, this is very much necessary for any kind of decolonizing pedagogy.
Indeed. So we've shown how voice messages in this case provided us with continually negotiated methods for sharing and challenging each other's beliefs. And our future work together via publications and performance will legitimize these beliefs, catapulting the potential significance of this work together for structural change. Because we understand at the moment it's more a change that's existing at a more grassroots level and an embodied level. We have also pointed to examples of horizontality and reflexivity that supported these conditions. So we would now like to open the floor to you and your questions, maybe starting with these here. And I'll leave it up to you to field these, Chris, unless you want to say anything else, Sibu.
No, I think maybe the next thing that I'll say would to be answer the questions that will be proposed for us. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Claire and Sibusiso, thank you very much. Questions could just go into the chat. Otherwise, please just speak. I think it's difficult for Claire and Sibusiso to see hands up. So we're a small group. So please just ask your question.
I'll stop sharing.
Let me start. Claire and Sibusiso, so far at this first 4 months of the interaction has really just been establishing a working relationship and the kind of communication technologies that would facilitate a non-hierarchical relationship and engagement. Is that a fair summary of what you've been doing?
Yeah, we've gone quite deep in terms of the theoretical notions behind what we've been learning about as well. You know, having Ruby teach some of the basics meant that we could both engage and then have a language to play around with rather than me kind of teaching him these things. And also Ruby is a specialist in viewpoints in facilitating it. And I know viewpoints from more of a theoretical point of view and analyzing it. So we're up to the point where we're sharing exercises, and then Sibusiso's coming back to me about like what aspect of those exercises he'll want to explore in the body, and we're trying to work out how we're going to do that. So maybe we can use I've thought about using a voice message to actually record the exercise, and then for him to work out in his own space and to listen to it and work with it. But it's so hard because as the facilitator, you're watching, right? So you're watching the bodies in the room and you're responding as you're speaking. So it might be quite alien, but that's one idea. And then we've also thought about filming each other. Obviously, like the natural way would be to have a video call and then us set up here, which we've done a little bit in the room, and then you guide them as they're walking around, which is how a lot of performance is working at the moment. But a lot of this does require also collaboration, and it's the influence of the other body for the body to be thinking in the body, and that idea of the shared body shared by the collaborators, and that also creates an intensity that takes you away from thinking in other ways that you might be used to. So there's a lot of challenges here in how we're negotiating the next stage so that he can continue to keep learning. I can, and myself too, as we're going. And we can continue the training until an opportunity comes up where he can work with real bodies in the room.
Thanks.
Well, I'm going to chip in. It's a very interesting discussion, and I think you were able to gather quite substantial material through your exchanges with Sibu and so on. And what I saw on the slides is very exciting. And it proposes not just something that is limited to the topic that you are discussing, which is decolonizing facilitator training. The material is pointing to many other areas, and I think you may need to focus your mind on what exactly eventually the paper is going to look like, because all the avenues that you're exploring are quite exciting, and they could be well, perhaps more than one paper, but I know that you are limited to just a few, maybe one or something like that. And in that direction, I would like you to guide me to connect the dots so that I can be a little more helpful. You deployed the concept of viewpoints, which I do understand. I think in the old days, when I went to school, we used to call it picturization or something like that. Now you have zeroed in on one aspect of it, which is emotion or how to emote, and then the rest of the elements of that system, the viewpoint system, have not been explored. I wondered if that is your repurposing of the model to focus on one thing, or you just wanted to demonstrate how one element can work in this kind of endeavor while trying to explore other things maybe in future. I'm not quite clear on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, we mustn't have been very clear in that sense. We just chose emotion because of how he responded differently in each of the different pedagogies, video call versus WhatsApp voice messages. We haven't just focused on emotion. And actually, it's almost to the contrary, where neither of us that passionate about trying to get actors to access emotion. It's like we use other tools to be able to allow them into it. And a big part of the analysis in the article is also looking at the culturally bound notions of emotion and how we feel differently, obviously across cultures and the complexities of those. And so I think this is also at the root of where there are problems with teaching emotion because it's so personal. So there's like, yeah, we haven't actually even focused on emotion that much. It's just that we brought it out in this analysis because there was like a ripe comparison between how he responded in each of those cases. Do you have anything to say on that, Sibu?
No, I agree with what you're saying. I think it's exactly that, because I have my own kind of also personal politics. I think the reason why we dwelled also on emotion was the fact that is also what I'm looking at, what I was looking at actually at that time with my students, and also just trying to guide them and to give them a sense, of what it means to really emote. And I think that's why it became such a very interesting topic that we actually dwelled on. But definitely we did also look at, the other elements within viewpoints. And I think what is also interesting is that how I always at most times, try to locate, and understand these, elements within a kind of very Afrocentric, approach. What do they mean to me? Since my work is very much Afrocentric focused, so it was also just trying to see how, in a way, because I think there's also a bit of room, to decolonize some of these elements, especially looking at the scope of what the project is about.
And Samuel, in a very American way, which Mary Overley's work isn't necessarily, she refers to these 6 viewpoints also as a language and materials for facilitating practice. And we've also talked about that. Like, it's like, okay, we're learning in order to then have an opportunity to rename it. And it's not necessarily that I feel so passionately about Mary Overley's practices, but it's how I've seen in a very unique way actors like letting go of a bunch of other very strong beliefs that they held about using, for example, Setswana or Sepedi in a workshopping scenario or a devising scenario. And then as soon as they started to kind of generate material in this much more embodied sense, they had opportunities for challenging that when they started including Setswana mixed with English, for example. Whereas before that, they had said very adamantly, no, it belongs on its own, in its own traditional form of performance. And for that shift to occur, it just made me very interested in this viewpoints approach. And so that's what we're kind of using as materials, but then looking at renaming. And then it's like this process of coming in and out of the material, because obviously it's still American, and I'm still white, I'm still from Australia. So we're kind of constantly locating and trying to understand how it could be useful.
So that was going to be my next question. Which is that viewpoints, if you look at the concepts of viewpoints, they're not just limited to theater. I think every artistic discipline uses, although they may not use the term viewpoints, they use elements of it in painting, in design, videography, in directing, in many other facets of the arts. But it has a very strong visual bias. And this is where I would like to come in. And your research seems to center around language. I wanted you, both of you, Sibu and yourself, to explain how something that is performatic, visually, can be repurposed to explain phenomena in language and, of course, facilitator training. How would you mobilize or deploy that concept to? It's just from my understanding. Does that make sense, Claire?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And it's the most bizarre thing, isn't it? It's like, and a few people said to me at the beginning of my research in South Africa 5 years ago, it'll end up being about the body. And I'm like, okay, and I'm all caught up in the linguistics, and by the end, it ended up being about the body. And it's not just because the body is very in right now. Everyone's talking about it. In performance, it's always been about the body. My point is that by focusing so much on impulses in the body, that's even Ruby referred to what you're creating as a palette or a sculpture, and there's a lot of these visual references, like you said, and it's like by focusing so much on the visual, it makes people think less about the languages that they're drawing or the linguistic resources. And I think that's kind of part of like this segue into thinking about something else, and not as preoccupied with what languages or what mixes of languages they're inviting into the room. It's secondary. And that's where this kind of notion of disinhibiting the actor or releasing the actor to not have to think about that, especially in this complex, multi-layered, post-colonial, decolonial, post-apartheid situation that South Africa is in, and so it's like there's been so many layers of these language ideologies that have been really have segregated people, and that have people have taken on, that they've embodied, and then it kind of creates an opportunity to release them from that, even if it's just for a few moments. Do you have anything to add, Sibu?
I mean, definitely. As you guys are talking, I'm thinking about my own experiences as a performer, mostly, and how sometimes I feel that a language that is foreign to me, kind of disallows me, to be able to live in my body and express myself, physiologically. So I remember when I worked with Prof. Sam Ravingai, I think it was in 2014. We were doing, what's that play when I was playing Pinky? What was it, Professor Sam?
No Good Friday. No
Good Friday, definitely. Yeah. So one of the notes that you gave me, right, which have stuck with me, is that as a performer, I work from the outside in and not the inside out. But, engaging with my practice over the years, I've learned to also understand that another thing that creates that kind of thing to happen is language, right? Me interacting with the language, sometimes it creates some kind of distancing between, the language itself and how I express it, right? And the more I engage with the language, the more it sits in the body, and also I think another thing that is very much, central to Viewpoints is the notion of improvisation. And I've noticed this, especially from a devising perspective, as a performer and as a facilitator, there's a magical, shift that happens, the minute you allow someone to improvise, in a language which they're comfortable in, and also how the body then begins to, be a part of that process, of expression.
Draw your attention to a question. Oh, I see there Claire's answered it, but maybe everybody could attend to this. From Smangaliso, would you like to just speak your question, Smangaliso?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. No, I was just interested, but Claire has clarified by answering on the chat. I was just interested, where are there additional applications of the process that will take place? But Claire has answered that. And I was also asking, will there be work created by Sibusiso through the Decolonized facilitation? And Claire has also answered that. Which elements of Viewpoints did you discover need to be decolonized? I think that's the one question that I'd like input on.
Yeah, I think that in many ways, most of the Viewpoints have the potential to be decolonized, depending on how they're taught and the language is used, and how it's the complexity of this interaction between facilitator and learner. And so I think that all of them will need to be decolonized at some stage, whether it's through my interaction with Sibusiso or Ruby's, or Sibusiso interacting with the actors in the autobiographical performance making process. And I don't mean to be vague. I think mainly the way that actor training is regurgitated sometimes isn't really relevant for the people that are listening. And sometimes, I could just have a day that I'm really tired and talking to Sibu and communicate things in a way that doesn't allow him a way in, or doesn't allow him kind of a room to negotiate how we talk about this thing. And it's completely reliant on the context at hand. And I think that's why decolonizing is a continuous discussion. And it doesn't just end with structures being changed, So I don't know if that's a sort of roundabout way of answering your question.
No, thank you so much. You did answer the question. And I think also with my experiences of being in a tertiary institution, I think it's very important to be cognizant of the context which you find yourself, and the context which you find yourself teaching certain pedagogies, and be open to the possibilities of what it can become just by being in the context that you're in. But yeah, thank you so much. You did answer the question.
Thank you.
I see we're heading towards the end. We're going over the hour. I hope everybody who's here can stay with us for at least another 5 minutes. Can I ask a question? How differently would you have approached this if you had been physically present, Claire? How?
Quite. I would have wanted it to be within 3 months. That was my original plan. And I have a tendency just to go for it. Like, okay, we'll meet again today. Okay, do you want to meet tomorrow? Oh yeah, let's do this. And I just felt like it would have been more compact, and we would have developed a rapport and trust in person that you can do, you know, like my partner asked me the other day, so do you think you'd go for a beer with Sibusiso? I'm like, yeah, of course, but I still, because it's an online space, and also because we are, and this made me reflect, because we are writing in voice messages and so forth, we always kind of keep it in this professional domain. It's like it has to be personal as well, because it's creative, and because of the nature of what it is. But it's totally changed the way that we communicate and the distances, and it's very different to how I would usually navigate a process like this. But also out of that has come a lot of opportunities because of doing it so slowly. It feels so relaxing, especially if it's seeing it as a pedagogical activity, you know, and also that we don't have this kind of pervading assessments and everything this from the top level, you know, that is still imposed upon us as lecturers or teachers. So I think that, you know, doing it over a longer period of time has meant that we've been able to maintain a certain level of horizontality, where otherwise sometimes I might get impatient and be like, let's catch up, I want to do something, you know. I look like a screaming child when I did that, do you understand? So, you know, I think we would have approached it differently. I'm going to stop talking, Sibu.
Definitely. I think it's also, you know, it's different when we speak about it as opposed to actually doing it, you know. So I think it's just also just the magic of physical interaction, you know. There's something really magical about that. I mean, for the most part of last year personally, I've been doing a lot of teaching online. So this year, so I teach somewhere else. So when we started the year, it was physical, and man, you know, I then started to understand really the importance of being in the space with people, you know, dealing with concepts on the floor, you know, and what it means, and how much learning and teaching and an exchange can happen, you know, within that space. But to be quite honest, I think we have pushed, you know, we've fought, you know, the barriers, and we've tried to really, you know, eliminate, you know, anything that could have jeopardized, you know, the project. And I think the past few months have been that, you know, they've been very insightful, and hopefully, fingers crossed, you know, that things, you know, change and shift so that, you know, there can be some kind of a physical, you know, pedagogical kind of interaction.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Well, this is just my last comment.
Sure.
I just want to affirm, Christo, through you, Christo. I just want to affirm the work that the two of you are doing. I think it's really quite exciting. And my sense is that you are not beholden to all the 6 elements of the view system, because you are trying to experiment with what works in this particular specific context. So for me, when the practice dictates something else, then you will have to go with that. And if it means that the viewpoints will have to be revised in order to suit the new context which you are doing, then that becomes part of your decolonization, I suspect. And things might not be as clear as they should be as you are exploring these issues. But I think, and I suspect that one of the final outcomes could be a significant revision of the viewpoint system, and that will become your contribution to the paper that you're writing. And I'm looking forward to that. And the fact that you are deploying this concept to language, I've never seen it happen. And I think it might be very exciting to read work that seems to speak to how this concept can be used in understanding language in the decolonial sense. And yeah, I can't wait to read the whole thing. It's really promising to be quite exciting. So I just want to end on that confirmation note. It's quite exciting. Thank you.
Great. Samuel, thank you very much on that very confirmatory note. And I think all of us are looking forward to how your research progresses. And I'm hoping that we could have at least one more follow-up at a later stage in your creative collaboration, where you could report on where you've got with this really interesting and exciting collaborative remote research. So Claire and Sibusiso, thank you very much, and all the best with taking this forward. Okay.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Sure. All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to close the workshop now. And yeah, we'll stay in touch and looking forward to hearing more. So